And after hear two great presentations from Rodney and Morey, we got a basic understanding about just-in-time, privileged access management, and why they are so important. Now, we'd like to have a group to discuss and kind of share your insights, right? So your insights from the things you are seeing give us a different perspective. So we call it the insights for just-in-time security. All right, so to join this panel, you already know Rodney and Morey. We have James and Maxim, James from Calian Group and Maxim from RBC, Royal Bank of Canada. So maybe James and Maxim, you can quickly spend 1 minute, just talk about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Sure, I'll start with that. So my name is Max, and I'm a director within IEM Engineering for Royal Bank of Canada within Privileged Access Management and Authentication domains. Most of my life, well, professional life, I've spent, it's been 9 years with Royal Bank of Canada. I've dedicated myself to identity and access management domain, starting from doing administration of access from an application perspective, moving on to different infrastructures, et cetera. Started getting to PAM about 4 or 5 years ago, and I had a privilege and opportunity to take the lead last year within the role and lead a successful implementation of PAM solution within Royal Bank.
Excellent, wonderful. Very glad to have you here, Max.
Thank you.
And James, just a quick comment about yourself.
Yeah, sure. James Phillips. I'm Director of Corporate Cybersecurity at Calian Group. I have just over 20 years experience, and I primarily focus on security architecture, incident response, and forensics and threat hunting. Those are my kind of key areas.
All right, so we have 4 great industry leaders, experts here. So I think the first question, usually when we start the panel discussion, we always start with why do we need something, right? So why do we need a PAM, or why do we need a just-in-time security? But those 2 speakers already cover most of them, so we don't need to repeat that one. But I want to kind of like look at this question from another angle. Since just-in-time security or PAM is so important, but what we observe is many companies still don't have PAM. They don't have any implementation. So any reason, so the question becomes why not? So why do companies not have PAM, right? So at this moment, do you see any reasons why? Well, since if this is so important, why they don't have that? And
I can
jump in.
Yeah, I can start with this if you want, because from the incident response and forensics point of view, this is something that comes up in the postmortems when we're looking at root causes of the incident, what happened. And many times we're finding that companies think that one of 2 things, that number one, they're just too small and they don't need a PAM and just-in-time security. And the second one is there's a belief that it might be too complex for their environment. And of course, both of those things are probably not true in most environments, but that's what we see over and over again while we ask in the after incident review.
Okay, it's too complex. All right, anyone else want to share your things? Your insight?
Yeah, we also hear quite a bit that people think it'll break things, and it's really, it doesn't. When we dealt with Windows XP and Windows 7, there were so many functions that when you removed admin rights broke. Now there's still quite a fit, like adding a printer or changing a system clock, but the operating systems have matured across the board, not only Windows, but Mac OS and Unix and Linux. And it's much easier to define the tasks that someone needs with admin rights and put them under PAM management, or even supply those credentials to do those individual tasks, like a website or something else, than it has before. Basically, most technology is just matured where PAM fits in well.
Mm-hmm. So technology is ready. It just like the company or the management maybe have some concerns. What do you think, Rodney?
Yeah, so I think 2 things. So, the complexity, especially in the on-prem world, was pretty significant. If we look at sort of the Microsoft solutions through Identity Lifecycle Manager or Microsoft Identity Manager, it's fairly complex implementation for most organizations. You know, we're talking about, you know, separate forest with forest level trusts and things like that to really implement, you know, PAM on-prem, you know, in that sort of traditional model. And then as things move to the cloud, you know, again, it's just one of those things. The history has been that it's complex. It has gotten a lot easier, but I just think it has it still has the connotation of being overly complex.
Okay. So Max, what do you think? Is that complex?
Well, it is complex, right? And I think some organizations, right, they need to understand why it is really important, right? To get the buy-in from that executive, you know, leadership sponsorship. And because it's the balance between security and complexity, right? Security and simplicity. You know, because bringing additional security controls, right, might increase additional workloads, right? They'll need to perform more activities, which might operationally impact their workflows.
Okay, all right. So we kind of touch on some like challenges there, but I recall last year when I look at some report, maybe from Gartner. So they talk about what's their like a top 10 IT or security project so company invested last year. So PAM, privilege access management, pretty much like a top 2, top 3, something like that. Very high, right? So seems like industry is catching up, want to do these things. So from industry trends point of view, what do you see there? So it doesn't matter, it's a technology or the way to implement that. So Morey, I see you listed 3 books. So you pretty much know all the history of the future, right? So just tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so really, the analysts have listed as number 1, and it goes back to what Rodney and I have both been speaking about. Threat actors will always look for the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest method to go undetected to conduct a nefarious activity. When we talk about privileged access and passwords, and now that they're everywhere, it's a really low-hanging fruit for them to go after. We have passwords everywhere, our home routers, our phones, everything in the office, and some of them we don't even know. I mean, there are many devices, IoT devices, we plug in and just assume they work, but we know they have to have credentials under the hood in order to operate, or they're being managed by one location or another. So with all of these concepts in mind and the proliferation, it basically just makes us say, look, we've got to get a better handle on it. We have to have a better way to manage it. And it is the easiest way for people to do it, for a threat actor to basically do it. If you take that away, then they'll find the next method. Originally, 10 years ago, vulnerabilities, exploits, worms, bots, etc. Mm-hmm. Now it's, I can guess your password fairly easy. I can crack your password fairly easy. I can steal it from memory. I can install a piece of malware that can gather them for us. That's why this is so important.
And as much as you know, because we're security professionals and we're IT professionals, as much as we like to think we're better than the average end user, we're not. We do the same things. We have, you know, systems, and a lot of it's not even on us. Like there's systems that we're signing up for a web service today, and you know the password, they wouldn't take special characters in the password. So there's other systems like that as well, right? And so, you know, we have, as humans, we're still human, we still have the same challenges with passwords that end users do. And so having a way to you know, secure that with, you know, just-in-time type of access goes a long way in simplifying things for ourselves as well.
Bryan, I'll just mention an email that I got this morning, and literally this morning.
Yeah. It
came from an anonymous source. It had in the subject line password and then an old nickname I had. I don't have a problem saying it. It's called Haber, for Haber, H-E-Y-B-E-R. It's a password I probably used about 15 years ago. No, yeah, I do not.
I think I got that similar email before.
Yeah, and it was trying to spam me for some illicit activity on the web and asking for $2,000 in Bitcoins. But the boldness to put an old password wherever they scraped it from in the subject line and going, I know your password.
Yeah.
Hopefully I was not stupid enough to still reuse it and try to extort me. That's a low-hanging fruit for someone to try to collect it. If they get less than 1% of the people or even 0.1% of the people, they've made a lot of money.
Yeah. And if quite many people reuse the password, right? So the same credential password, so then people can, like hackers can move around then to try to get there. And so Max, from your end, from industry trend point of view, because you're in charge of those engineering regarding the PAM and authentication automation, what do you see from the industry?
Well, I see definitely, right? As we're talking about users, everybody hates passwords, right? We're kind of enforcing them to put these security measures and they start hating passwords. So going to the future of password free, right? In privileged access management, right? Which would heavily rely on, multi-factor authentication, right? Rather than asking for users' password, MFA could request them for device push notification, right? Or a biometric scan, either through a fingerprint or a facial recognition, right? So that's one of the trends I would say, as well as ability for PAM solution to be able to respond to dynamic environment, right? With cloud ability to seamlessly integrate with one of the major infrastructures for public and private clouds, right? That's speed to be able to adjust and dynamically shift around, as well as supporting multiple MFA factors, right, within the solution. I think that's one of the key ones.
I installed quite many like MFA apps, like a Microsoft, there's a Google, so people are catching up. And all right, cool. James, let's also switch the gear a little bit because we talk about many companies still don't have a good PAM solutions there. So your background is from the forensics, the incident response side. So what did you see? What would happen if people didn't to do it right? So, or another way to ask that question is, what kind of things made a hacker's job easier?
Yeah, well, the first thing, the reason I'm smiling is I'm thinking back, and I can't think of an instance where I've done an investigation where they have had PAM and just-in-time security rolled out properly. So, from your very first question, why PAM? That's a perfect example right there. Now, PAM and just-in-time security are not going to be the root causes of not going to be a root cause of an incident, but it definitely, as both of our speakers have alluded to, contribute to that lateral movement across a network, right? So by having the just-in-time security and the privileged access management, that is going to greatly reduce that ability to move from a least privileged user, escalate your privilege, and then move laterally across the network.
You're on mute, Bryan.
To unmute that one.
Cool. Hey, I'm glad I'm not the only one tonight.
Cool. All right. I'm still learning a lot of those industry, like those online tools and the chat, all those things. I think after this crisis, most of us become like social media, online conference savvy, right? So before many people may not just a lot of time just stay at the office, but right now, kind of see everybody become a kind of a pro. But then in other way means most of people will use all kind of online tools, then security become more and more important. Okay. So speaking of some like technologies wise, so we love technology. So, and one thing I love cybersecurity really because you kind of have to experience some cutting edge technology. Kind of you need to look at, okay, where the industry is going or some like emerging technology. So specifically related to just-in-time security or PAM, what do you see? What kind of a major tools or technology or something do you see is important in this field?
Who would you like to go first?
Yeah, no
Yeah, sure.
specific order. Yeah.
There are two things, and this is probably near and dear to everyone on this call's heart. PAM was traditionally a on-premise technology. People were scared and are still scared to put secrets, passwords in the cloud. There are ways of doing it that the risk is very, very low. And I think with everybody working from home and a larger remote workforce, removing admin rights, storing credentials, I think that this technology stack is going to see a massive push within the next year to 2 years to the cloud in scale because of all the changes we've seen. And I think that's going to be the biggest push. I mean, we can say passwordless authentication, passwordless two-factor. Those are all great little add-ons in the identity space. But this is one discipline that has not seen a massive push to the cloud, and I think it's coming.
Okay, so cloud definitely is the enabler for this one.
I believe so. I don't know if my peers would agree or not, but
Yeah,
that's why we're here.
Cloud is definitely going to simplify the the implementation, and if we take a look at again, if we take a look at from a Microsoft perspective, our on-prem solution with Identity Manager, and the requirements around dedicated forest and forest level trusts, that's a lot for most organizations to implement. But if we take a look at sort of the privileged identity management capabilities within Azure Active Directory, it's a much easier, simple to configure type of solution, right? And so the challenge there is it's a separate solution on-prem in the cloud, and I know that's where other organizations like BeyondTrust have good solutions in that for that hybrid type scenario. But especially in the cloud, when somebody can access that from anywhere, that's where sort of the idea of zero trust comes into place, and then privileged identity management for those elevated privileges when needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From a just-in-time security point of view, I really like the idea of, we've talked an awful lot about account management, but I really like the idea of just-in-time security with network access and hardware access, so just-in-time access to VMs, just-in-time access to certain ports and services and applications. So tying the two together is extremely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Max, what do you think about some tools or technologies? What do you think related to this domain?
Well, definitely. I think the key thing is also, right, ensuring the key privilege access security capabilities that are implemented, right? Provisioning, deprovisioning controls, ensuring, right, as we mentioned, multi-factor authentication, behavioral and analytics, right? Privilege credential visibility, right? It's key. One of the gaps, right? As applications grow, get deployed, it's hard to track what privileges are out there, right? Which entitlements are granted to what account, right? Mm-hmm. So to be able to manage the rapid increase of that, it's very important, right? Ensuring we have session management and monitoring, as well as reviewing, right, and taking necessary actions. Mm-hmm. To be able to understand the behavior, right, of actions that are performed, ensuring they comply with the baseline behavior. Once again, right, just-in-time security. And the key thing, I think, is the principle of least privilege, right? Ensuring you don't have enough, you have permissions, your standard set of permissions that are required to do your day-to-day work, right? And where possible, right, enabling the just-in-time security to elevate it for a certain amount of time and, least time required.
That's so true. Because I can also give a quick example. Right now, we're doing the cloud security experiential learning. So we have 15 students there or learners there. So they need to do all kinds of experiments. For this round, we use Microsoft Azure. But we cannot give them too much permission, right? So if they can anytime can provision a very expensive VM or Kubernetes or whatever things will get broken. So what we implement actually leverage the PIM, Microsoft AD PIM. So it's just in time to allow them to do give a certain privilege although it's in the learning environment, but we exercise that. That actually helps a lot to just from admin point of view. So just a small example there.
To go along with that, Bryan, from my point of view in forensics incident response, we have to be thinking about, most companies actually don't have in-house forensics and incident response. They bring in a contractor. So we have to think about those instances where you've had an incident, you have to bring somebody from the outside in. As an incident responder, I'm going to need certain access and access to certain logs and parts of the network. And
That's
how can you do that quickly, efficiently, and very securely? And it ties right in with what Morey was saying earlier about having those on-demand accounts.
Yeah, definitely. Because not everybody, just the people in, even though you have a lot of staffs, but not everybody is just your staff. You have a guest, you have a third-party contractors, like in your case, a forensics specialist. They need to have the privilege to do things, but how do you manage that? Right. So
Especially, especially with the remote workforce we're dealing with right now. I'm at home. Prove that I'm at home and I should have access for that time. Those triggers I talked about. Well, next week I might be in the office again. It's still me, but I got to make sure it is me, and I'm supposed to be doing what I'm doing. I think the example you gave with the classwork is classic, because if we all probably have kids at home doing school, my daughter's exams are only available for this period of time. We're just taking the concepts of just in time, like that exam is only available for this hour, and now applying it to business. It's an easy way to understand what's really going on.
Yeah, exactly. And very interesting, because another part is I like to give a quick example, is a just-in-time VM access. Virtual machine access, which are kind of not a privilege, but more like from a network part of block certain ports, right? So the 22 or like a 3389, those are RDP. We, in our class, experiential learning class, we put there, and we kind of using that just-in-time VM access, which helps a lot. Because when we look at the log file, and when we look at those security center, Microsoft Security Center, the moment we launch some VM on the cloud, we get a brute force attack from everywhere. Amazingly, because just for learning, students put kind of like several VMs online. Like at night, like a couple of hours later, when I look at that, there's an alert that people attack that VM from everywhere. And there's a brute force, there's things. So if you don't have that kind of just-in-time access, then you have a trouble there. Yeah, so that's an interesting confound. Yeah. All right. So people talk about, I think in Rodney's talk and also Morey's talk about zero trust, right? So I think Pan or Just-in-Time also linked to the zero trust. Can you elaborate a little bit more for people not familiar with the zero trust? Because we tend to trust, right? So now it's like a zero trust.
And that's exactly it. We tend to trust, right? And so that trust is based on the fact that our users, our admins, everybody accessing the resources that we had were in an office, right? So they were, our office, 1950 Meadowvale Boulevard. We'd all be in that office. We'd all be plugged in or connected via, a secure wireless connection. But to get into that building, you need a swipe card. You need a domain join device to be able to connect to wireless or Wi-Fi. And so that was trusted. That being said, though, if that is our level of trust, what we see a lot of issues with then, though, is when that when the user does get malicious activity taking place on that device, or an adversary is now owning that device and using that device, we've removed all of the other sort of security controls, and we're just assuming that because they are on the corporate network, and they have a badge to get into the building, that they're secure. But now with the cloud, with COVID and everybody working from home, that trust is gone. We don't have that level of trust anymore. And I've been on a number of calls with customers who are trying to ramp up their VPN bandwidth and their VPN endpoint.
Yeah. Nope.
Looks like we
Okay.
lost Rodney now.
There's a track there.
Same glitch. So I'm going to follow up on Rodney's thought.
Right,
And
yeah.
every vendor that you will all speak to, the definition of zero trust is different. It's a shame. The best guidance I could give to anybody is to look at the NIST paper for their definition of zero trust.
Mhm.
It's broad enough that it covers all the vendors, but it will leave a little out. And the easiest way that I like to explain it recently to people, we got social distancing going on. Zero trust is electronic distancing going on. You want to get close to someone or potentially shake their hand, you've got to form a level of trust that you're not going to have a problem.
Yeah.
And whether that's a port, whether that's an application, whether that's a user,
Mhm.
you have to have some form of unbrokered authentication, a test
Yeah.
to say, yes, you should be doing that. You are allowed to do that. And it should be granular enough and not network dependent in order to form that trust. So look at the NIST paper. That's the best definition I can give you. And Rodney, it looked like you're back. I just tried to cover for you. Hopefully it helped.
Yeah.
I heard everything.
Let's quickly cover that. Obviously, you guys have trust.
You're going to leave them hanging.
Yeah.
So-
Max, how their trust is working with your kind of your domains, like authentication, like automation?
Yeah, so I think they coexist as a multi-layered security, right? They resemble, right? They have common principles, right? Something I mentioned previously, right? Least privilege access, right? Meaning they get access, they need as much to minimize the exposure of sensitive parts within the network in a zero trust model, right? As well as for PAM, not having too much privileges, right? To perform what is required. Another one is multi-factor authentication, right? It also core value, I think, of zero trust security. Simplifying, enabling more, two controls of piece of evidence to verify that you is you, right? And then PAM leverages MFA to provide that defense, right, against unauthorized system access and exploitation.
Okay.
So I think they kind of come well hand in hand together.
Right. Excellent. And I also look at people's questions or comment there. AI, so the people also comment on AI. So right now, if we cannot handle anything, we can kind of like put AI there. Hopefully that machine intelligence can solve that. So how AI working with PAM? So we on one side, people need to make judgment, but on the other side, how that technology or the process or automation leverage AI right now, specific to just in time.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at sort of, Microsoft does a lot of AI at various different levels. When we look at just-in-time access for an end user or for an admin, it is looking at, this mass amount of data that's collected and using machine learning to essentially, pluck off the low-hanging fruit, right? So we don't need, I don't need as an incident responder to look at failed password attempts because that is essentially a waste of my time. And we want to then be able to, take the threat intelligence that we're capturing and apply machine learning to that so that we can block those password stuffing, credential stuffing, password spray type of attacks, and then really look at, have our incident responders and really look at some of the actual failed attempts, whether it is then determined to be a compromised identity that then we need to investigate, see what's happened, see what level of access they've gotten, and sort of chase them down and give them the boot, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it all comes down to the amount of time that we have in the day, the number of security professionals that we have responding to these incidents, and leveraging AI to sort of take care of those simple types of attacks. And and really just focus on sort of that advanced threat hunting.
Right.
So I have a stronger opinion on it.
Yeah.
I think any AI or ML technology applied to a single discipline generally will only do a limited amount for the organization. These technologies benefit the most when you can apply other data sources, when you can aggregate logs, when you can aggregate more information. And in the case of what Rodney is speaking from, just knowing, password attacks, it's not enough. Knowing the context of multiple logins or the identity was recently created and being able to pull additional sources is where AI and ML shine. So I'm an advocate, don't focus at a low level for these technologies. Bring them up to where your SIMs may be or other security information consolidation is, and then apply those technologies from a dedicated vendor or native to your stack at those higher levels, because you'll get the most value out of it.
Okay, very cool. And speaking of the technology, when we talked about cloud already, but cloud is also, people right now, when company use, especially for larger organization, they are using multi-cloud, right? So they may have a Microsoft, Azure, they have a AWS, like Google. They may also have a like a hybrid cloud, which means they have a public, private, or community, or kind of all mix them together. So to manage that, and plus the on-premise things, so to manage the just-in-time, that's actually, the environment is so complex, right? So how do you solve that kind of a challenge, multi-cloud, multi kind of all kind of context? Any insights on that side?
So it really starts with centralizing your control plane from, the traditional, approach of, having access to the corporate network, to focusing on identity as a control plane. Because when we have identity as a control plane, and that identity is what is granted.
It looks like he froze again.
Yeah, it looks like we lost
I think I know where he's going with that. In the NIST model, the control plane for identity provides the absolute view into anything any user or application identity would have. So whether you have that hosted in one cloud or another, being able to aggregate that data as a control plane, as a conceptual model, gives you the visibility across all of your cloud environments. Rodney, hopefully you came back and I finished your sentence.
People are going to married because you keep finishing
Look, it's best really practices, guys.
Handshake there, right? It's a perfect handshake there. Okay, all right. We're getting to near the end of our panel discussion. Last thing I would like to talk about a little bit about is talent development. Because to implement PAM or just in time, we need people to work on that one. And a lot of new concept, the new way of doing things. And people also need some experience. So especially, as you all mentioned, it's a quite complex implementation, and there's all kind of factors. So how can people if they are interested in this domain, IAM, PAM, or you want to hire them, so how do they do their professional development, or what kind of skills or the things they need to pay attention to? What's your view on that? Maybe Max, you can start.
Sure, and I think there's definitely reaching out, to the open source content that's available. I've seen a really great benefit recently with the COVID-19 situation. A lot of PAM companies were providing free webinars, right? Either through YouTube or through their own channels, understanding the technology, providing concepts and how the technology operates, right? Some technologies offer you an open source platform, right? So, leveraging those webinars, getting through the training, some documentation online, trying this out, right? Either on your local workstation. But I think the goal, within the organizations, key thing is also to retain the talent and grow talent internally, right? So a lot of it, kind of creating that development framework within the organization, ensuring the education is in place across the organization. And I think that's the key, right? Basically, I think, stuff like this, I really like your idea with like opening the Slack channel. I think this would be a great opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
For security professionals to share some insights, to share these, webinars that are going on from various vendors, right? And this is how we can get all together, united to ensure we increase that talent within that domain.
Perfect. Yeah, so totally agree, because a lot of times, especially when we have those events, so people talk, but after that, that's it, right? So well, how do you get most continue to do that? So that's one thing we add from this event. So we open our Slack channel, so we can post a lot of resource there. People can continue to discuss the things. So it's kind of like a continued education there. All right, okay, cool. And James, anything from your end?
Yeah, definitely. I would want people to demonstrate working knowledge of authentication and access control systems. So Active Directory, show me that you've taken a course in it, that you can discuss it. I'm not asking you to be an expert in it, but a foundational knowledge. Because after all, that's what all the PAM and just-in-time security is based on, is actually the underlying authentication and access mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a great source of sort of community and collaboration and information is the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange.
I can't bail him out on that one.
So start with Canadian, I guess, cyber threats.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's a really good organization, not for profit, private sector, lots of information sharing and collaboration on Canadian specific cyber threat.
Okay, all right. Okay, so to wrap up our discussion, I also look at the people, there like the comments here, so there are quite many questions. So one question is, that's actually related to the application. So whitelisting the application, so people are not downloading malicious software so during the work. So is that related to PAM, or is that?
It is.
Yeah.
So application control has really become a subset of PAM, because you have to know what the application is and what privileges you want to give to it. So think of some of the older application programs that did everything by hash. They're not sustainable anymore. So you really want to state, okay, I'm going to application whitelist by a digital signature. Something is signed. And these programs can only run from these directories with these privileges. And if I see it try to run from a different location, I'll deny it or downgrade its privileges. So most PAM products and projects on the endpoint do application control, whitelisting, blacklisting, and gray listing with reputation services to accomplish that goal.
Okay. Okay, good to know. Very cool.
Bryan, can I leave us with something?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of homework for our panelists. So we're talking about just-in-time security and access management. And I'm absolutely sure that everybody on this call right now, their home router has the capability to schedule internet access and to schedule port access and service access. So my question is have any of the attendees actually gone into their own home routers and looked to see, hey, I'm asleep from 10 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning. Should I really have my home router actually freely talking to the web? Or I'm going away for a week. Have I thought about going to my home router and shutting off the internet through scheduling while I'm gone? So we can actually practice just-in-time security and some access management right from our house.
That's very good tips and apply to everybody. Because just like me, I just recently got my Rogers upgrade my internet. Yeah, so there's a default router, right? So there's a setting. I hadn't even get enough time to look into all those options, right? So that's a homework need to be done. And the funny thing is, like those young generation, like for example, my sons, they are pretty much savvy on this one. They know a lot of settings, and they optimize the channels for their usage, like a gaming or their chat, whatever. They create their dedicated channel anyway. All right. Okay, so we kind of like come to the end of this panel discussion. before we go, right? So what is your, like, if I ask, what's your number one recommendation? So we talk a lot of areas. We talk about why we need a PAN, why company didn't have a PAN, what kind of technology, what kind of concerns, what kind of challenges. So we talk a lot of things, including talent development. So if you want to give the, like, one last recommendation to people, what do you want to say? Morey?
Okay, I was waiting for you to pick on somebody. Mine is fairly straightforward, and it's, I think that everyone on this call would probably, nod their head. It's passwords. Look, make them all unique. Don't reuse them. Keep them separate. Cycle them. Don't recycle them. In other words, don't reuse the same password from something else. Use a password manager at work. Use an enterprise password manager. The threat actors out there are going after your credentials. And if we make them all unique, your exposure is limited, that if they do get a hold of one, they don't necessarily move around to everything. That's true for at home, and that's especially true that's work. I know it's tough to remember all of them. Many of us use types of schemes to remember them, but that's what password managers are for, and that's your best bet, especially ones that are corporate-based that can do the auto rotation when you think there's any type of problem. So practice, safe password practices.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Very good insight. All right, Rodney? Oh, I think Rodney is...
I think Rodney might be frozen. I can jump in here, Brian, if you want.
Yeah, okay, sure, yeah.
Okay. I think that the best piece of advice I can give anybody is it starts with the fundamentals. So have good policy, good procedures, good role-based access controls already in place. Make sure you have a good data classification scheme. All of these things combined with PAM will make for a much more secure environment.
Very good.
I turned my video off, so maybe you can hear me better now.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so kind of going back to passwords, passwordless, and there was a question on passwordless. It's something that's coming. It's going to take a few years before we can really fully implement a true passwordless type of infrastructure. But kind of going back to Morey's point as well, and some of the other discussion around zero trust.
Okay, yeah, zero trust is very, very important. Max, what do you think?
I'd say a few things. First, probably stop sharing. Most organizations and most people might still be sharing passwords across each other, right? So stop doing that right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
Another key thing is definitely, educating your community, making sure people understand how important to be secure, how important privileged access, management. And I think from like an organizational perspective, ensuring to have a vision, to have your strategy, right? Understanding those industry trends, looking out what's happening, how the environment dynamically changes, and adjusting your strategy and ensuring you plan ahead